Hudson Yards was supposed to be the future, a $25 billion private real estate development on the far west side of Manhattan, built directly over an active rail yard, announced to the world as the largest private real estate development in American history. It was going to redefine the New York skyline. It was going to anchor an entirely new neighborhood. Instead, it became one of the most expensive cautionary tales in modern urban planning. Let's understand how that happened. If you're new here, consider subscribing. We dig into the real story behind the buildings, the budgets, and the broken promises that shape the cities we live in. What Hudson Yards was supposed to be. The pitch for Hudson Yards was ambitious in the specific way that only enormous sums of money can sustain. The development, led by related companies and Oxford Properties Group, was planned for a 28-acre site on Manhattan's far west side between 30th and 34th Streets west of 10th Avenue. That site was the former home of a massive open-air rail yard belonging to the Metropolitan Transportation Authority, and that rail yard was still operational, which meant the entire development had to be constructed on an enormous elevated platform built directly over functioning subway and rail tracks below. The cost of that platform alone was roughly $3 billion. And that was just one piece of a project budget that eventually crossed $25 billion across the full development, making it by a wide margin the largest private real estate development in United States history. The original plans, announced in the early 2000s, called for 18 million square feet of commercial and residential space, built in phases. Phase 1 included 4 commercial office towers, luxury residential buildings, a hotel, a 7-story retail mall called The Shops at Hudson Yards, and a performance venue called The Shed, an observation deck called Edge, and the most photographed structure of all, a honeycomb-shaped climbing sculpture called Vessel, designed by British architect Thomas Heatherwick. Phase 2 was supposed to push further west, adding more towers and connecting the whole development to the Hudson River waterfront. The marketing language was relentless. Hudson Yards wasn't just a development, like it was a city within a city, a brand new neighborhood that would generate its own economic gravity. Related Companies chairman Stephen Ross called it a once-in-a-generation opportunity to reshape New York. When it opened to the public in March 2019, it was celebrated as a triumph of architecture, of ambition, of American private enterprise. That celebration did not age well. The tax break nobody talked about. Here's the part that got buried under all that largest private development in history language. Hudson Yards was never purely private. The mechanism was something called the Hudson Yards Infrastructure Corporation, a special entity created by New York City specifically to issue bonds and fund the public infrastructure the development needed to function. The biggest piece of that was extending the number 7 subway line to a brand new station at 34th Street and 11th Avenue, which opened in September 2015 at a cost of roughly $2.4 billion. Think about that for a second. The far west side had no subway access at all before this. Without that extension, none of the tenants Hudson Yards needed could realistically get there. The subway wasn't a nice addition. It was the precondition for the entire project, and it was paid for with public money. On top of that, residential buildings at Hudson Yards qualified for the 421A property tax exemption, a program originally created in the 1970s to encourage housing in genuinely blighted parts of the city, now being applied to some of the most expensive condos in Manhattan. In 2018, the Independent Budget Office of New York City ran the numbers. Counting the infrastructure spending, the tax abatements, and other contributions over a 30-year window, the total public subsidy supporting Hudson Yards came out to more than $6 billion. $6 billion from New York City taxpayers funneled into a project that was being sold to the public as a victory for private enterprise and free markets. To be fair, this kind of arrangement isn't unusual. Cities subsidize private development all the time. What's unusual here is the ratio. In exchange for $6 billion in public money, the city got a luxury district that serves a narrow slice of the population, almost no affordable housing, office towers full of companies that were already in Manhattan anyway, and an observation deck that charges $50 a ticket. SUNY urban planning professor Tom Angotti put it bluntly, Hudson Yards is the most expensive public subsidy in New York's history, dressed up as a private development. Be honest, does that sound like a fair trade to you? $6 billion in public money for this? That's the kind of thing people get genuinely divided on, and honestly, I want to hear where you land in the comments. The Vessel disaster. If one structure represents everything that went wrong at Hudson Yards, it's the Vessel. The Vessel is a 150-foot-tall honeycomb-shaped climbing structure, 154 interlocking staircases, 80 landings, roughly 2,500 steps, all open to the sky. It was built in Italy, shipped to New York, and assembled as the literal centerpiece of the entire development. It cost approximately $200 million. Heatherwick called it a gift to the public. Stephen Ross compared it to the Eiffel Tower. That comparison did not survive contact with reality. Within about a year and a half of opening, 3 young people, all under the age of 25, died by suicide by jumping from the structure. After the 3rd death in January 2021, Related closed the vessel. It reopened in May 2021 with new rules. No solo visitors, only groups of 2 or more, enhanced security screening. 2 months later, a 14-year-old visiting New York with his family climbed over a barrier and jumped. He died. The vessel closed again. This time, it stayed closed for nearly 3 years. The core problem was architectural. The vessel was designed as an open-air experience. That openness, those unobstructed views straight down to the plaza below, was the point. It's also exactly what made the structure so dangerous for anyone in crisis. The safety railings were only about waist height, and the geometry of the staircases meant that almost everywhere you stood, there was a clear, unbroken drop beneath you. For 3 years, Related companies, Heatherwick Studio, and city officials debated what to do with a $200 million monument that nobody had designed with this risk in mind. In October 2024, the vessel finally reopened, with floor-to-ceiling steel mesh barriers installed across several of its staircases and platforms. The very top level remains permanently closed to the public. Additional security staff were brought in. It was, by most accounts, a genuine attempt to balance safety with the structure's original design intent. Now here's the thing. Even with those changes, the vessel will probably never be what it was marketed as in 2019. It opened as a social vessel for the public. Today, it's a heavily monitored structure wrapped in steel mesh with its top floor sealed off that took 5 years and 4 deaths to figure out how to make survivable. This is where people get divided. Some will say Related did the responsible thing eventually. Others will say a structure. This dangerous should never have been built the way it was in the first place. Which side are you on, the shops at Hudson Yards and the retail apocalypse? The shops at Hudson Yards is a 7-story luxury mall anchored by Neiman Marcus, and it opened in March 2019 at, and there's really no gentler way to say this, the worst possible moment in modern American retail history. By 2019, the decline of physical luxury retail was already well underway. E-commerce, changing shopping habits, a wave of department store bankruptcies, all of it was common knowledge in the industry. And into that environment, Related in Oxford opened a brand new luxury-anchored mall in a location with no surrounding residential neighborhood, no existing foot traffic, and a customer base that would have to make a deliberate trip just to get there. Neiman Marcus, which had already been in financial trouble for years, filed for bankruptcy in May 2020, just 14 months after opening its Hudson Yards flagship. As part of that bankruptcy, Neiman Marcus exited the space entirely. The anchor tenant of the entire retail component of a $25 billion development was gone before it completed 2 years of operation. Since then, the shops at Hudson Yards has gone through repeated retenanting, swapping out traditional luxury fashion retailers for experiential concepts. The same playbook struggling malls across America have been running for a decade. The difference is that this building was designed, built, and marketed specifically for a luxury retail model it could no longer support. The remote work problem? Hudson Yards was built fundamentally as an office district. The commercial towers were the financial engine of the whole project, by the long-term leases that were supposed to justify the construction costs and pay down the debt. And those towers needed people, thousands of office workers every weekday, filling the restaurants, using the plazas, creating the street-level energy that would make city within a city something more than a slogan. Then the pandemic happened. The shift to remote and hybrid work hit Hudson Yards harder than almost anywhere else in Manhattan because of what Hudson Yards doesn't have. Neighborhoods like Midtown, the Financial District, Chelsea, and the West Village have decades of residential density and independent businesses that exist whether or not office towers are full. When office occupancy drops in those areas, they thin out, but they don't go silent. Hudson Yards has almost none of that baseline activity. The residential towers are luxury condos with relatively few units. The retail is built for shoppers, not for residents who just need a dry cleaner or a corner deli. On a weekday at noon without office workers, the streets of Hudson Yards look more like a suburban office park on a weekend than a Manhattan neighborhood. 30 Hudson Yards, the 1,268-foot tower that houses KKR, Wells Fargo, and the Edge Observation Deck, kept its leases, but many tenants shifted to hybrid schedules, meaning the building runs at a fraction of its design capacity most days. 10 Hudson Yards houses Coach, L'Oreal, and SAP, and 50 Hudson Yards, a 58-story tower that opened in October 2022, became the global headquarters of BlackRock, the world's largest asset manager, along with major tenants like Meta and ServiceNow. That's a genuine win. BlackRock relocating its headquarters there, with the state kicking in $25 million in tax credits to help make it happen, is a real corporate anchor. But it was delivered into a market where the assumptions behind the entire financial model, full offices, daily foot traffic, constant street activity, simply didn't hold anymore. The 35 Hudson Yards problem. 35 Hudson Yards was supposed to be the residential and hospitality crown jewel of Phase 1. A 92-story tower combining the Equinox Hotel and Equinox Fitness flagship with luxury condominiums marketed at some of the highest prices per square foot in New York City history. The Equinox Hotel opened in 2019 with rooms starting around $700 a night, built entirely around a wellness and fitness concept like genuinely novel and reviewed favorably by the luxury travel press. Then the pandemic shut it down along with everything else. When it reopened, the luxury travel market had shifted. More demand toward leisure and resort destinations, slower recovery in business travel. The hotel still operates today and gets generally positive reviews. It's a legitimate product. It's just not the kind of hotel that benefits from neighborhood foot traffic, because Hudson Yards doesn't have much foot traffic to offer. The condos tell a tougher story. Units at 35 Hudson Yards started in the multi-million-dollar range, with penthouses listed above $30 million. The pricing assumed the Hudson Yards address would command a premium comparable to Central Park South or the West Village. That premium never fully showed up. By mid-2023, reporting from the Wall Street Journal found that roughly half the units at 35 Hudson Yards remained unsold more than 4 years after sales launched, with the units that did sell going for around 30% below original asking prices, and some discounted by nearly half. As of 2025, Related has reportedly begun looking for a buyer for the Equinox Hotel and Gym itself, along with a chunk of office space in the building. Now, say it in the comments, did anyone seriously think that buying a brand new address with zero history could compete with neighborhoods that took a century to become desirable? The culture problem. The Shed sits at the northern edge of Phase 1. Performance and arts venue with a distinctive retractable outer shell that can extend over the adjacent plaza to create a massive covered event space. It was designed by Diller Scofidio plus Renfro with Rockwell Group, and architecturally, it's one of the more genuinely interesting buildings at Hudson Yards. Programming-wise, the Shed has hosted ambitious work across performance, visual art, and experimental formats that few other New York venues could support. That part is real, but financially, the Shed has struggled. As a nonprofit relying on earned revenue, philanthropy, and city funding, it operates under a lease with Related structured to make the space economically workable, meaning Related is effectively subsidizing the rent. In 2022, the Shed went through a significant financial restructuring, including layoffs and reduced programming, to bring its costs in line with what it could actually earn, and that points to a bigger issue that goes beyond any single building. Now, the streets of Hudson Yards are clean, well-designed, architecturally ambitious, and almost always empty. There's no coffee shop where the same regulars show up every morning, no bar that's been on the same corner for 20 years, no bodega, no laundromat, no street vendors, no accidents, and no history. New York Times architecture critic Michael Kimmelman described it as a gated community for the very rich, dressed up as a neighborhood, and that gets at something real. A neighborhood isn't something a company can build in a decade. It's something that accumulates over generations, through countless small human choices and adaptations and compromises. Hudson Yards tried to buy a neighborhood for $25 billion. What it built instead was a very expensive development. What it means for how cities get built. None of this means the underlying idea was crazy. The far west side of Manhattan genuinely was underused relative to its potential, and developing it eventually made sense. The number 7 subway extension was a legitimate, valuable piece of infrastructure on its own terms, regardless of what got built on top of it. The real question is whether this specific project built this specific way, was the right vehicle for $6 billion of public money, and whether New Yorkers got fair value for that investment? There's an interesting comparison just a few blocks away, the High Line. That elevated park running from the meatpacking district up to Hudson Yards was built mostly with public money and private philanthropy, championed by a nonprofit, and built for public use. In the process, it generated billions of dollars in private real estate value for property owners along its route. That's the same basic dynamic, public investment creating private gains, that Hudson Yards took and scaled up to its most extreme version. Urban planning author Samuel Stein has described it this way: Hudson Yards is what happens when a city stops treating land as a public resource and starts treating it purely as a vehicle for private wealth creation. The $25 billion figure is the one everyone remembers. The $6 billion figure that the public cost gets mentioned far less often. And the neighborhood that public money was supposed to help create still hasn't really materialized, where Hudson Yards stands today. So is it a total failure? Not exactly, and it's worth being precise about what has and hasn't worked. The office towers have tenants, 10, 30, and 55 Hudson Yards house major companies: Coach, L'Oreal, SAP, KKR, Wells Fargo, CNN, and others. 50 Hudson Yards is BlackRock's global headquarters, alongside Meta and other major tenants. The platform, that extraordinary feat of engineering built over live rail tracks, is there, and it works. The Equinox Hotel operates and gets good reviews. The Edge observation deck is open, drawing visitors at $36 to $50 a ticket, competing with One World Observatory and Top of the Rock. What hasn't worked is the bigger promise. The word neighborhood has quietly disappeared from most of the marketing, replaced by softer language like business district and destination. Phase 2, the additional towers, the waterfront connection, the expansion across 10th Avenue, has been indefinitely paused. In 2023, Related announced that 66 Hudson Boulevard East, a key Phase 2 tower, wouldn't proceed on its original timeline, citing rising interest rates, a weak office investment market, and a softened luxury condo market. The platform sits there, the built half of the project stands, the other half remains an open question with no real timeline. So, where does that leave us? Hudson Yards spent $25 billion and pulled in $6 billion more from the public, largely to prove something that, in hindsight, maybe should have been obvious. You cannot manufacture a neighborhood. You can build towers, a mall, an observation deck, and a $200 million climbing structure that took 5 years and 4 tragedies to make safe enough to reopen. You can extend a subway line to a corner where almost nobody used to live. You can get the renderings, the press releases, and the opening weekend photos exactly right. What you can't buy, no matter how much money you spend, is decades of accumulated human presence. The mix of people, incomes, businesses, and ordinary contradictions that make a place feel like somewhere instead of something built to look like somewhere. Most people get this wrong. They assume biggest and most expensive automatically mean best. Are you one of them? Or did you already have a feeling Hudson Yards was more style than substance? That's the story of New York's $25 billion Hudson Yards, and why more than 5 years after it opened, it's still looking for the neighborhood it promised to become. If this one was worth your time, hit that like button and let me know in the comments. What do you think the city should have done differently? We've got more stories like this coming.